Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you guys about religious studies, the academic study of world religions. How do you study religion? What is religion? And what tools and conceptual apparatuses and constructions do we use to investigate and understand what religion is? This is what we're going to be getting into today. So please give me a thumbs up in the chat. Let me know that the audio is all right over here on YouTube. Hope everyone is having a wonderful and exciting and blessed Tuesday. So God bless you and yours. Today is going to be a very fun and informative conversation. So we're going to hit on a bunch of stuff that we're going to keep it pretty heady today. So certainly bring your thinking caps, as your elementary school teacher used to say. What's going on, guys, in the chat? Again, throw a thumbs up. Let me know that the audio is doing all right over here on YouTube. Shout out to everyone over on D Live. Hope you guys are doing well. And anybody else who's watching. So today we're going to be getting into what are the 7 dimensions of religion. This is actually a topic that I've made a video on previously. And so as we get into what is religious studies, we're going to be talking about the field of religious studies, how it developed, what is it exactly, some of the prominent movers and shakers in the construction of this field, and then how you go about studying religion. So some of the tools you may use are going to be things like the 7 dimensions of religion as established by Ninian Smart. So we're going to be getting into who is Ninian Smart. What are the 7 dimensions of religion? Are these things useful or are they not useful in regards to looking at world religions? What is so we're also going to be looking at in regards to religious studies, maybe some of the paradigmatic shortcomings, right, as a sort of secular approach to world religions, trying to study religion in quote-unquote an objective way, or at least this is what they say, that what does that insinuate? So we're going to be looking into post-Enlightenment thought and how this is, so secularism itself is going to be rooted within the sort of religious studies paradigm. Can you study religion? These are some of the criticisms that have arisen over time. Whether, again, what are you really studying religion in these sort of secular ways? Can religion be defined? So we're going to be looking at a multiplicity of definitions today. So I have a whole list from E.B. Tyler to James George Frazer, Otto Rank, Emile Durkheim, Paul Tillich, Sigmund Freud, Clifford Geertz, George Bernard Shaw. We got a whole host of people that we're going to be looking at how have they defined religion, including somebody like a William James, right? The famous American pragmatist, psychologist, and his famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. How does he go about defining what religion is? And so we're going to see that a lot of these people, depending on what field they come from, whether they're sociologists, whether they're psychologists, whether they're a theologian, whether they're more anthropological, that's going to really shape how they go about defining religion. And so, again, we're going to move through some of these really important theorists of religion and what their thoughts were in regards to defining it. And then finally, I have a whole list of approaches to religion. So we're going to be looking at what is the anthropology of religion, what is the geography of religion, the philosophy of religion, the sociology of religion, the psychology of religion. How are these different approaches? How do they ask different questions? What are they getting at? These are, again, going to be some of the stuff that we're going to be discussing today. So if you can, again, brothers and sisters, smash that like button. Always helps with the algorithm. Looks like we are doing great with sound, and everything is on the up and up. Looks like it's the same crew is here over on YouTube. Again, God bless all you guys. Hope everyone is doing well. First thing, before we're getting into it, of course, a little the usual business, if you will. I want to thank everyone who has joined and become members over at the website at davidpatrickcarey.com/register. Again, I greatly appreciate that. I'm going to throw that link over here in the chat. If you guys are in a position and you want to have access to now 12 exclusive videos up at the website, a couple of which are actually, some of the fitness videos are present on YouTube, but I have over a 2-hour conversation with Subdeacon Mark on his journey and testimony in regards to finding orthodox in his life. So if you're interested in something like that, private conversations with existential delight, private videos that I've made just for members, or all of my workout stuff, go over to the website, davidpatrickcarey.com, and become a member. That is one of the best ways in which you can support what it is I'm trying to do. If you'd like to just donate, you can do that. If you want to send a super chat in today, you can do that as well. But anything is greatly appreciated. And again, I thank all you guys for all the love and support. So God bless. Now, in regards to today's video, we are going to be talking about religious studies. What is the study of religion? How do you academically study religion? How does that happen? What are the things in which you go about doing? And so I first want to talk about then what is the field of religious studies. And it's really a secular attempt, an objective attempt to study religion as opposed to theology. So that's going to be an important difference between what religious study is going to be doing and what the traditional theologian is doing. So I know many of you guys, many of us already being rooted in a particular religious persuasion are very much interested in theology. And we talk about theology and some of the intricacies and related to, for example, Eastern Orthodox Christian theology. But theology is much more concerned with the nature of the transcendent. When we study theology, no matter what religious tradition that you're looking at, theology is actually looking at the transcendent. It is looking beyond this world. So it's descriptions of life and death. It's descriptions of justice, of truth, transcendent narratives. Depending on how you want to categorize things, you could talk about transcendent mythologies, this or that. So religious studies is not going to be focusing on soteriology, just a useful term that just means salvation or how salvation is attained. That's not what the religious studies scholar's doing. He's much more interested in the nuts and bolts as to what religion is doing. Again, looking at the aesthetics, looking at the rituals, looking at some of the values, looking at the languages that are used, looking at the larger understandings of mythology. And you can even, again, if you're approaching with the sort of psychological tool belt, looking at the archetypal understandings, if you will. These are ways in which the religious studies scholar is going to approach religion. And so by nature, it's going to be secular, and by nature, it's going to be comparative. And so when we look at religious studies as a field, it's by nature looking at religion in a sort of perennialistic way. So perennialism, as we've critiqued and criticized on this YouTube channel a multitude of times, is really a presupposition of relativism itself, because when you take a perennialistic approach that all religions lead to the same place, what knowledge base, what epistemology are you using to say that A equals not A, and how these are actually leading to the same place? You can't, because the thing that a lot of the perennialists are doing are adopting sort of Western understandings of epistemology that's going to be rooted in our theories of truth, for example, a sort of correspondential understanding that's really rooted, as we've talked about, post-scholasticism, the development of ideas, Enlightenment, the scientific method, correspondential, that facts are things in and of the world. They correspond. Language corresponds to reality, right? When we do science, we can take means and averages. We can use numbers and subsets to understand the world. So that's some of the stuff that the religious studies scholar is going to be doing. And so because it's secular, because it's comparative, by the beginning point, the presupposition, if you will, of religious studies is already putting all religions into the same box. Now, if you are of a religious persuasion, obviously, and you're not ecumenical in a sense, you're not a perennialist, you may push or be resistant against being all in, how again are we defining religion, but you see how that is where the secular, that is where the objective standard is arising here, is this sort of grouping all these things into one basket. And so, as I'm highlighting, it's replete with its own paradigmatic limitations, right? When we looking at what even academia does, it's limited by its own paradigm, by its own presuppositions. We've talked about this a gazillion times. And so rooted within a post-Enlightenment worldview, and really that paradigm is continually shifting, as we've seen with the sort of movements in postmodernism, as we see the movements in critical race theory and all this different stuff, changing how academia is even done. So that's a whole nother thing in and of itself. Religious studies originated, again, this is a relatively recent field. Most people aren't aware of this. As a discipline, as a field of study, it didn't arise until really the late 19th century. So we're talking about the late 1800s here. It isn't even until the first, what we would call organized interfaith gathering of all these different, of many of the, what we would call world religions. That was actually in 1893 in Chicago, at the Chicago World Fair. The Parliament of Religions is what it was called. It was at the, which is now the Art Institute of Chicago. And this was really the first time that all these quote unquote religious representatives of all these different world religions came together. And again, highlighting this idea that was already being developed 30, 40 years before as religions, a single description of religion. And really, this is the remnants of post-Enlightenment thinking, and why secularism is so important, because we see before this, how were Europeans, it's not like the British Empire wasn't encountering China or India, or Spain didn't encounter South America well before the 19th century. So it's not like they didn't know all these other religions existed. What's the difference? Well, the difference is the degradation of their association with Christianity. And so as we see the rise of religious studies, or a lot of these different studies, women's studies, religious studies, all these different studies or subfields within the university, that it's rooted within a moving away of the traditionality and much of the paradigm that's going to be substantiated by Christianity. So that's already rooted in much of this stuff, as I'm highlighting. So it originated in the 19th century, and this was due to the rise in scholastic and historical understandings of the Bible. So we're seeing, I don't want to call it critical theory, because it's not. Critical theory is a thing in which we talk about. When you say critical theory, that's a thing. That's a theoretical development in academia, in intellectual history. But critical scholarship regarding the Bible was certainly on the rise. Again, with the rise in secularism itself, which is going to be tied to, at least at this point, a general rise in atheism. Again, we've talked about in previous videos regarding the Pew Research Center that atheism really stays around 3% of the population. That Christians, atheism isn't the thing that Christians need to worry about. And as we've talked about, it's the New Age, is that it's the false forms of spirituality that is much more pernicious and enticing to people than atheism itself. Atheism leaves people kind of cold and dry, and that's why it's basically stayed about 3%. But the rise in general atheism during this time, again, we see this with the French Revolution and all this stuff, is critical scholarship, and then also the introduction of Buddhist and Hindu text into European languages. So again, you can think about the British East India Company and its relationship to India and its really discovering of so many different texts. It began wanting to translate these things along with many of the German scholars. Schelling was very much interested in the Upanishads, but what we would consider really the father of religious studies, right? We've talked about Emile Durkheim, and he was the father of sociology. The real father of religious studies would be Max Mueller, Friedrich Max Mueller. And some of you guys may be familiar with him, some of you may not. But he was a German-born philologist, so he was incredibly astute in language, in philology. Some of you guys, philology's kind of died out in academia, so some of you guys may not be familiar with that term, but it's really the sort of the studying of language and sort of root words, roots, linguistic roots, and how languages connect and overlap and develop over time. Philology was really the kind of preeminent field there for a while. And Max Mueller was a philologist. So being a philologist, he had an academic's grasp of things like Greek, Latin, Arabic, Persian, and Sanskrit. So again, if you can imagine, where this is a pre-internet world, this is a pre-TV world, this is the late 19th century, and to be sort of so culturally sophisticated, to have an academic's grasp of all these different languages and then looking at culture itself, I think is really kind of mind-bending to think about. Now, again, often the criticism then of somebody like a Max Mueller is that they were a armchair scholar, right? That he writes about all these different world religions. He's considered to be an Indoologist, or that's kind of what he referred to himself, really, somebody who studies India, what we would call now maybe a Hinduologist or something like that. He was known for his grasp of Sanskrit. He was known for his understanding of Hinduism and Buddhism, and yet he never left Britain. That's what's so interesting about some of this stuff, is to be so sort of deep within one's academic field. Again, have an academic's grasp of all those different languages: Greek, Latin, Arabic, Persian, and Sanskrit in the late 19th century, and become essentially the world expert on Hinduism or Buddhism. He has there's like a 50-book translation project that he was ahead of. It's called like the Books of the East. The Sacred Books of the East. Yeah, that's the Sacred Books of the East. So the guy was an incredible scholar. Yet he never left Britain. He never went to India. He never stepped foot inside of a Buddhist nation. He never went to, a Hindu ritual. He never went to Bali or anything like that. He stayed in Britain. And the reason why this German-born philologist, Max Mueller, lived and resided and most of his scholarship occurred in Britain is because of the East India Company. The East India Company had access to so many Hindu and Buddhist texts that's where he could get access to these texts, to translate them, to read them, to understand the worldview of the Oriental, and he was fascinated by it. So that's why he stayed in Britain, and that's why a lot of the scholarship at that time, Britain was a happening place. So interesting stuff there. And he had, one of the things about Max Mueller, one of the common criticisms, is that he was also had a bit of an anti-Christian streak in him. And so what he would never say he was the founder of religious studies. This is actually, this sort of colloquial phrase comes much later. It's more American. But he described himself as founding sort of the science of religion. And so again, his Gifford lectures, very prominent lecture series. I'm sure some of you guys have heard. So still today, they still have the Gifford lecture series. So prominent intellectuals will be asked to give a series of lectures that usually happen at various Scottish universities, British universities, different places. But his Gifford lectures that were in 1888. Talking about Max Mueller still. Think about the names of these. So natural religion was the first lecture. The course of lectures was intended as purely introductory and had for its object a definition of natural religion in its widest sense. So again, providing a definition to grasp this new emerging field of talking about what world religions are. Not everybody, even just using that concept, not everybody thought in those ways. That now is very common because of the globalization, because of the multiculturalism that has emerged due to the interconnectivity of our world, be it the internet, technology, traveling, immigration, all this different stuff has now sort of mixed up the world to a degree that we talk about religion in a very post 19th century way, that we already categorize a lot of these things as into the same basket. But most people thought there were all these other traditions. Like if you were to ask the average person, let's say at the beginning of the 19th century, the beginning of the 1800s, or in the 18th century, there's Christianity, the truth, and then there's all these different other traditions, because the conceptual relationship wasn't that what I'm doing is just as valid and equal to what everybody else is doing. This is much more of an abstract academic take that really becomes prominent within our own vernacular. So, so that is Max Mueller, and that is some of the that was kind of where I wanted to start today's discussion. Now, I also wanted to move into, so we see the field of religious studies emerging. Hold on, let me see if we got any questions here. It doesn't look like we have any questions over in the super chat. So we see then the field of religious studies emerging. We see the secular concept of a sort of an objective study of religion. This is due to, again, the West relationship and receiving of so many sacred texts from the East, that these new understandings of religion occur. And scholars then are trying to really study and know things through reading, through text. This is what Max Mueller does. Again, what we would call an armchair scholar. But this also leads to then, how do you develop conceptual tools to study religion? How can you look at religion in an objective way? And one of the tool sets that I think is useful, and I want to share with you guys, and again, I made a video about this before, are the 7 dimensions of religion. And so let me put that up there. So here we go. You'll probably see it on the screen now. The 7 dimensions of religion. Again, these were founded by a gentleman named Ninian Smart, and he was actually a Scottish professor. And he established the first department of religious studies at the University of Lancaster. Now, again, this is much more contemporary. This is mid-20th century here. So the term religious studies, again, wasn't as prominent, but the field of studying religion per se, as what we know it, this was emerging in the late 19th century. Now what we're calling then religious studies, that this attempt to study religion wants to be housed and confined and consolidated into its own field of study, this begins to happen much later. This is actually where the University of Chicago becomes very prominent as well, due to work by scholars like Mircea Eliade. But the University of Chicago becomes sort of like the mecca of religious studies, right? Of the academic study of religion. And we can see that, again, when we look back to September 11th, interesting date, 1888, that World Fair occurred in Chicago. It was in Chicago where we had the first ever sort of world interfaith gathering at the World Fair. So, Ninian Smart, as I said, founded the first religious studies department at the University of Lancaster, but also a much prominent portion of his career actually occurred at the University of Santa Barbara. So UCSB, the University of California, Santa Barbara, is actually, and that department is known for its religious studies. It has a very high reputation, the University of Santa Barbara. And he was very influential, obviously, in the development of the field. Religious studies does not address truth claims or apology, but understanding, functionality, and even functionalism, as we'll see when we look into definitions of religion from various scholars. The functionalist approach is a very popular approach. Again, a lot of these people are secular atheist types, and so how else are you going to attempt to interpret religion outside a sort of utilitarian functionalistic approach? So many of them sort of took that model. I do want to mention before jumping into the 7 dimensions, please smash that like if you can over here on YouTube. If you guys want to see exclusive content, also don't forget to sign up at the website. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw in a super chat. The 7 dimensions of religion. So how can you go about then providing avenues to understand religion? Well, these 7 dimensions are very useful. And the first one is ritual. So for Ninny and Smart, and I think this is true for many of us, when we look at really sort of any ritual, any religious ceremony, gathering, celebration, there's a lot of going to be ritualistic framework to it. And I think this is a useful way then to study religion. How can you study it? One way is which you can study rituals. How do societies and cultures and religious traditions and tribal formations use ritual? How do they move physically in the world? What do the rituals symbolize? So what do adherents do? Things like prayer, the sort of formality of prayer. Puja is a sort of offering that's a Sanskrit term related to Hinduism, where you'd have your sort of devotional statue or icon or whatever of a particular deity, and you can then provide offering towards that, and that Sanskrit word is called puja. But that pilgrimage, the way in which people dress, the ritualistic ways in which people dress, that is also another way. The festivals and annual cycles, right? The liturgical calendar is what we would call a ritual calendar. It's the time of it's the movement of the seasons, and then identifying the times in which certain celebrations, ritual occurrences are performed. This is really important. This is a way in which we can look at religions cross-culturally. And of course, sacrifices. Do they offer sacrifice? How does sacrifice portray itself in a tradition? Obviously, in Christianity, we don't offer sacrifices, but we still have sacrifices. And so the whole concept of carrying your own cross is a sort of sacrificial process of one's own life. So you can be a little bit more nuanced. Again, how do you look at it? Now, we're not slicing the throat of a goat and then offering it to some deity, but sacrifice can be understood in a multitude of different ways. So the first one's ritual. The second one is the experiential or the emotional dimension of religion. Religion provides an experiential and emotional dimension. What do people feel? And so, looking at this dimension, I think we can also make really interesting critiques and criticisms, even within the sort of differences of Christianity itself. So we've talked about the sort of rationalism, the over cerebral, heady, rationalistic approach of Protestantism, and how it sort of smashed out much of the mystical dimensions of Christianity due to identifying that as Catholic and pagan, this or that. But in so doing, then allowed the opportunity for magic to really flourish in those Protestant nations. And so the experiential, people need to have experiences and emotional relationships towards what we would call the numinous. The numinous. This is a very important academic term, if you will. The numinous is really it's a concept coined by Rudolph Otto. So Rudolph Otto is an important, another religious studies scholar, if you will. This is mid-20th century. This is later. And he was very much, he described this concept numinous as a way to describe the overpowering sense of mystery that he believed to be part of all religions. The numinous, this sense of mystery, this felt presence that you're in relationship to that gives you awe, right? Protestantism, I would say, to a degree, begins to really smash out the noumenal qualities of Christianity, the mystical qualities of Christianity. So when you look at the sort of experiential and emotional, Is it any wonder then that those former Protestant nations, America, Canada, Northern Europe, Australia, that they actually then are the cultures where the opposition to Christianity is all about experience and emotion, right? Those Protestant nations suppressing those yearnings, if you will, in its own theology, then provide a way for those cultures then to go in the radical opposite way. It's all about feeling. It's all about the way you feel. My truth is equal to your truth, subjective experience. And then the focus on experience itself is still subjective and relativistic. And so it's very interesting, I think, just to talk about, just to highlight how maybe those things cross over. So the experiential and in the dimensional, what do people feel? This is really getting at the sort of phenomenological core of religion. How do people experience it? What is repentance, right? Or the actual feeling of repentance. So your own testimony and your own sort of repentant journey back to God or something like that, that would be related to the experiential, the emotional dimension. Feelings of awe, feelings of shame. The narrative and the mythic is the number 3. So moving on to number 3 is the narrative and the mythic dimension of religion. Oh, Nick Offinger just threw in $4.99, just paying my dues to the Orthodox based force. Thank you, brother. Nick, I appreciate that, my bro. Really do. Thank you very much for the $4.99. Again, God bless you and yours. Hope the family is doing well, and you're probably at work right now. So I appreciate you tuning in, brother. And again, thank you for the $4.99. So the number 3 dimension of religion is the narrative and the mythic. So another way in which you can analyze, look at religions across culture is what is their sort of narrative or their mythic dimension. This is going to look at what stories are told. What do they convey? Do they have an oral or a written society or a written tradition? What is the relationship to books? You know, one of the things, if you start looking at this, you know, often you call the Abrahamic traditions the religions of the book, or you call Christianity or Islam the religions of the book, meaning they have a singular book. But the religion, the world religion that has the most religious texts, by far, without question, is Buddhism. Buddhism has tons and tons of religious texts and manuscripts and secret scrolls. Many of which are in monasteries that people haven't even discovered. So I think that's another thing. That's an interesting thing about the sort of quote unquote academic study of religion, is learning about some of these factoids about religion that I think are really interesting. But the narrative and the mythic. So how does a religion then describe creation? How does it understand destruction, divine redemption, if it has it? What is the myth and ritual? Myth and ritual, are they closely connected? Often they are. Often rituals are a sort of physical expression of the myth, of the narrative, of the theology, of something of that nature. So, so that is the sort of narrative and mythic dimension. And so even within that narrative and mythic dimension being one of the 7 dimensions, you could see how the more specific and detailed you get into this stuff, I think the more things begin to open up. So we can see then, looking at the 7 dimensions of religion, and then as we'll see the different approaches to the study of religion, you could easily you could take a psychological approach to religion, or the psychology of religion, and then look at the narrative and mythic dimension. You could do a whole book on archetypes. Tons of people have, right? Mythic overlaps between different categories or things that you want to understand. This is giving you a vocabulary and a sort of conceptual framework to go about doing that type of research. And again, that's the point of today's video, is to talk about the academic study of world religions. So after the 3rd one, we go into the 4th dimension of religion, which is the doctrinal or the philosophical dimension of religion. And that's going to be related to the systematic conception of the world. The systematic conception of the world, the doctrinal, the paradigm, really, If we're going to use some of the, lingo that's often thrown around on this YouTube channel or within the orthosphere, if you will, this is the point in which you're really looking at the sort of paradigm, the presuppositional level of a religion, their theology. How do they understand sacred texts, the development of thought, the intellectual history? This is going to be related to its own doctrines, to its own understandings. And then you can look at that cross-culturally. So, within the sort of doctrinal or the philosophical dimension of religion, I can do a video, for example, looking at the Logos series. The Logos series is looking at a concept, the Logos, and how that then has develops or changes over different philosophical and religious traditions. That is spotting one thing and looking at its development only within one dimension of religion itself. And so, again, I think this stuff is very interesting and useful when we go about learning about other religions, right? None of this stuff is to disprove one's own theology. That is a whole, another thing. Again, beginning of this video is trying to highlight the sort of differentiation between theology and the academic study or religious studies, academic study of religion. These are asking totally different questions, and one doesn't invalidate the other. And that is really dualistic and just poor critical thinking. And I think some people fall into that problem as they, again, the sort of modern sentiment that somehow religion is antiquated and all this stuff, that we're beyond it. Anyways, I digress as always. Moving on to the fifth dimension of religion. We're looking at the ethical dimension of religion. What the ethical dimension of religion is looking at is what is good or bad. How do we go about analyzing these questions? Do we have a metaphysics for these things? That's going to move us back into sort of the doctrinal and the philosophical and understanding of the metaphysics. But how should one live their life? This would be a question that would be asked within the ethical dimension of religion. What is the Christian ethic of love, for example? This is a topic that a lot of people have wrote about and discussed. Sharia law. So the ethical and the legal, these go together, right? And even one of the approaches to religion that I was going to highlight later is the law in religion and how you can look at the legal systems in various nations, countries, cultures, and see how religion begins to shape their concepts of justice. And then the ways in which they go about attaining justice are going to be reflective of the development of thought and the development of those religious traditions. Very, very interesting and unique way to approach the study of religion that you wouldn't immediately think about. So the ethical and the legal, is represented by Torah, Noahide laws. I'm not going to go too far into that. I do like to keep my YouTube channel. And maybe that would be certainly a topic that could be handled much more accurately over on the website. So again, shout out to all those that have gone and signed up over at the website. But not going to get into Noahide laws, but that and Torah and Sharia law, the Christian ethic of love, all these different concepts would be housed under the ethical and the legal dimension of religion. The number 6 dimension is the societal and the institutional dimension of religion. And so the societal and the institutional are how people's intentions and interactions are organized. How are their interactions organized? How does a society begin to form and construct itself? How is that related to religion itself? A church, a mosque, a temple, a synagogue, if you will. These would fall under the societal and institutional. Monastic orders. You could, again, study monastic orders and monasticism itself. This would fall under this dimension. The Ummah. The Ummah is the collectivity of Islam itself. That's it's a phrase. If you're doing apologetics against Islam, you better know what the Ummah is. You got to know the thing in which you're debating on its own terms. You need to be able to steel man whoever you're up against. This is something I was recently talking about with somebody is that we can't, if you really want to be an apologist or this or that or an intellectual, you have to know what your rivals think. And you can't know what your rivals think if you don't read the people you disagree with. And so we can't, if that's what you're doing, not everybody's interested in those types of things, but I was talking to somebody that was interested in apologetics, and so you can't just read the things that you agree with and can think you're going to be able to debate or do apologetics. You have to read everything that you'll be debating to know where they're coming from and what they're pulling from. So that's another thing. I digress again, as always. But the social and institutional would also be related to concepts that we talked about with Emile Durkheim. We could see how the social and the institutional is going to be tied to even a more sociological approach to religion that we're going to see in somebody like Emile Durkheim, the father of sociology, a Peter Berger, we've talked about with his concept of the sacred canopy, a Max Weber, we've talked about with his book, Protestantism and the Spirit of Capitalism, or The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Great book. And what is he doing with that book? Well, he's actually approaching the economy of religion, or economics and religion, a totally unique and interesting way to approach that we will highlight later. Again, a lot of interesting ways you can actually begin to think about and study religion that you wouldn't initially, think about. So the seventh and last dimension of religion, so I'll stop rambling on this topic, is the material, physical forms of religion, how it is embodied, architecture and buildings, how homes are built, divine representations, art, the physical culture, the aesthetics of a society. These things are very interesting. I think the visual culture, one of the things that I felt going to university, doing all the graduate stuff in religious studies, teaching an introduction to world religions at the University of Illinois, I did that. And I loved doing that. I loved having a real classroom to actually teach and educate undergraduates. One of the things that I think is most underappreciated is the visual culture of religion. They'll teach you terminology. They'll teach you the holidays. They'll teach you important concepts related to a religion. They'll teach you about samsara and dharma and puja and all these different Sanskrit words related to understanding Hinduism or Buddhism. But I think there's generally a poor effort at actually showing people the visual or the material dimension of religion and the aesthetics, the art, the buildings, the temples, the way in which they construct sacred space, what goes into constructing sacred space. These, I think, are really interesting questions that really, when you're at the university, when you're offered religion, unless you have a more, I would say, conscientious professor or educator, they get devalued, they get underappreciated. That the material dimension of religion, the art, I think, is something that we should pay a little bit more attention to. In regards to the academic study, I think it's very interesting. So, physical forms of religion, how is it embodied? How are homes built? How are homes reflective of a culture's theology? This is a very interesting question that could be asked, and a whole research paper could be then, a whole research project could then be developed from it. Divine representations, how in a tribal setting, what do masks, clothing, what do they represent? How does a culture understand its sacred scripture? That would be part of material culture. That would also probably get back to the doctrinal and stuff like that. But what are some of the natural features related? This is what is going to tie into, again, when we get to the different approaches to religion, the geography of religion. Most people don't think about, well, how does the geography of a place reflect the theology of a particular tribe, of a particular, religious persuasion? How is that affected by geography? Most people don't think about that, but that's an interesting question that can be asked and can be analyzed. So that really sums up then my 7 dimensions of religion. Let me take down that. And I have a whole host now of definitions, actually, that I wanted to get into before we get into some of the approaches to religion. Or, really, I guess we could get into the approaches of religion and then get into the definition, since, might as well just do that. So we will get into the approaches of religion. So let me pull that up. Again, looks like everything is going good in the chat here. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, so these are ways in which we talked about 7 dimensions of religion. So each dimension then can be analyzed from a different approach, a different theoretical approach to the study of religion. Now we're going to move through some of those different approaches, and you could see then how you could systematically go through each dimension, how you could analyze each religion, and how you can analyze so many different aspects of spirituality and religion through each approach. And so it only gets more complexified. There's only becomes more and more and more, again, the deeper you go. So the first one is the anthropology of religion. The anthropology of religion. I think I've heard of that. What is the anthropology of religion? Well, anthropology is, right, the study of man. And anthropology is rooted within the sort of Darwinian Wallace framework of evolution and the sort of evolutionary roots of man. Now, again, we've talked about natural selection and some of the philosophical and presuppositional problems with Darwinianism. We're not going to do that. But the anthropology of religion is really concerned with the common basic human needs that religion fills. So that is where you're going to hear some of the rhetoric like, well, man is a social creature. You see, because man is a social creature, therefore he has to create sort of collectivistic understandings, mythologies that unite people. You could even use Peter Berger's sort of sociological theory of the sacred canopy. Well, religion, you see, it fulfills these individualistic needs of man, and it does that at a mass scale. And so you can see how the anthropological and the sociological are often very tied together in their approaches. But the anthropological approach is going to be interested in things like, well, okay, hold on, let me rephrase it. So within the anthropological approach of religion, you're going to hear things like religion then fulfills a need in man because of the necessity of hope, right? Because again, as I was pointing out, this is rooted within a Darwinian framework of evolution. A lot of the justification for it's going to have to be explained through sort of evolutionary means. And so religion itself then, well, you see what it does, it provides an evolutionary event. I'm not arguing for this, I'm just providing how people approach it. Well, you see, religion provides an evolutionary advantage because it provides more hope because of its transcendent mythologies. Therefore, the people who inhabit those religious traditions actually have aspirations and desires that transcend the material world, and actually somehow, some way, through placebo effects, that actually aids them in their successfulness, in their productivity. That would be a sort of anthropological approach to religion and how you would begin to define religion. And so we are certainly going to see that in some of our definitions. Now, the next approach, and that's also going to include cultural anthropology, I should mention. And cultural anthropology is a little bit different than what I was talking about. Cultural anthropology is really going to be that bridge, as I was highlighting, between sociological theories and anthropological theories. That cultural anthropology of religion is principally concerned with the cultural aspects of religion. A primary concern of the cultural anthropologists of religion are rituals, beliefs, religious art, and practices of piety. So you can see how their focus is going to be a little bit different, and that's the cultural anthropology of religion, which is really just a subset of anthropology of religion. Now, the next one that I think is really interesting, and I highlighted earlier with Max Weber's famous book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, how he ties the Industrial Revolution or aspects of the Industrial Revolution or industrialization and the theologies that were emerging after the Protestant Reformation. Max Weber does in his famous book, and it's really, really interesting how Protestant nations then are tied to capitalism, how thoughts of predestination were related to wealth, were related to concepts of capital, related to all these different things. He talks about that. That would be considered a sort of economic approach to religion, the economics of religion. And so it's really interesting that something like a Gallup polls, right? These are survey studies, these are Gallup polls, just large scale polling, show that there's actually a correlation between cultural wealth and religiosity. And it showed that on average, when a nation was more wealthy, it became less and less religious. And that on average, and there's always exceptions to these rules, right? There always are. There's always an exception. But generally speaking, that the less wealthy a country became, the more religious it became. And so you can see how from just this one little sliver of perspective in regards to the economics of religion would lead one to talk about the sort of primitive mindset of religion itself, right? That framework that somehow the wealthier a nation gets, the less religious it gets, would highlight to some, or some would then take away from it or assume that, yeah, well, that's just the case because, religion itself and having a sort of religious pious mindset is really a sort of primitive state. You see, they just haven't evolved yet. They're not part of like a first world industrial society yet or something like that. But also tied to, the economics of religion, you can look at to the wealth of general nation states. You can look at the wealth of homes or general homes within different nation states. You can look at how different religions deal with money. That's actually a really interesting one. So within the economics of religion, you could do a whole survey then on usury. You could do a whole survey on personal property. You could do a whole survey on the relationship or the theology of money. How does money play out in different world theologies? That would be another approach. Another way in which you could approach the study of religion through an economic framework is looking at the commodification of religion. And I've talked about this framework, or this phrasing at least, multiple times. There's a famous book, I actually have it right over there. It's on the commodification of religion. And we can see how really the spirit of sort of capitalism or consumerism, so rooted within a global sphere now, with global trade and everything, the global market, that religion itself is a commodity. Prayer beads, Jesus shirts, all this different, and we all fall victim to it. You and I and all of us. I bought these icons from Uncut Monastery. Well, actually, the St. Patrick one was given to me by Chrismation. Shout out to Bobby and Subdeacon Mark. But we're surrounded by. I just bought these bookmarks. Something like this. Shout out to Amber, member of my parish. She made this for me this past week. Thank you very much, Amber. So it's like we're always buying things. When you buy T-shirts from Logos Rising or some any Uncut Mountain or any Orthodox place, that is a form of the commodification of religion. So you can begin to then look at how religion is commodified, how it becomes a product, how it is consumed. For example, one of my professors who I worked very closely with during my undergraduate did a whole book on the commodification of yoga. And so she devoted multiple years of her life to writing this book, doing research, and really becoming a real prominent voice, or at least the academic voice, of talking about the commodification of yoga and how yogic practices out of India become commercialized, and then how people purchase these commercial products to represent who they are, to do all these things, how it gets distorted, and really it becomes a different thing. That yoga in the West is not yoga in the East, even though the people who consume yoga in the West often believe it to be. So that is rooted, again, with a whole framework, a sort of economics of religion, a very interesting way to approach the study of religion. The next point, the next approach to religion that I think is very interesting. Again, smash that like, guys, if you haven't. Always appreciate that. Another very interesting approach to religion is the geography of religion. I briefly highlighted this earlier in regards to the history, in regards to how does a religion, a theology, and a mythology reflect its geography. So when you're looking at more tribal societies, obviously you're going to see that where the mountain has a spirit, where certain tree species, animals, so as soon as you get into more of an animalistic more of a pagan, pantheistic framework theology, you can see how geography takes a real importance. But also, even within Christianity, places take importance. Natural features can take real importance. They can symbolize things. You can go on pilgrimages. So pilgrimaging would be a sort of way in which the geography of religion could be approached. I think it's a very interesting thing that most people don't think about. If you were to talk to somebody about studying religion, very few people would think about how the geography of the place and the nature in which it surrounds itself would reflect in the mythology and the theology, but it does. And I just wanted to highlight that. So the next approach to religion is the history of religion. And so the history of religion, or the historicity of individuals, the historicity of historical events, traditions, the development of tradition, the development of dogma, the development of theology, the historical development, all these different things would be rooted in what we would call the history of religion. And this is probably one of the bigger ways in which religion is actually studied, is through a sort of historical framework, which is necessary, though it's limiting. Each one of these approaches has its own limitations, its own paradigmatic limitations. But the history of religion, I think, is, again, probably the larger one. A lot of people use, so the framework a lot of people use when actually studying religion. And intellectual history would also be a way in which you can use the historical study of religion to look at religion. You can look at the historicity and the development of concepts. So again, just using that same development of logos series, that would be a way in which you could use a sort of historicity of religion to look at the development of a concept. Now, that's also going to tie into what we're going to call the philosophical study of religion here in a second. But the next way in which you can approach religion is what is called art and religion. So again, what we were talking about with the sort of material culture, the ideas, not the ideas, the art, the aesthetics, the material culture, the ways in which they create bowls, how they eat, right? How you eat is going to be sort of tied into the aesthetics to a degree. But art itself, music is a way in which I think is, again, underappreciated. How is music used and understood across religious traditions? This would be something that the religious scholar could be getting into and looking at religion from. Literature and text would also fall under the notion of art and religion. So literary approaches, looking at literature, looking at novels, even looking at poetry. Poetry and religion would fall under this category. The next one is a very big one and a very prominent one. And I've found that people who use this approach tend to overuse this approach for about everything, and that is the psychological approach to religion, or the psychology of religion. And my experience is people who get into psychology, whether that be often, it's popular right now, the sort of Jungian framework, whether they're Freudian or Jungian or whatever, that the people who are really enamored with the psychological approach use psychology to answer everything. You ask them any question about anything, and somehow it comes down to a psychological explanation. So the psychological dimension of religion is also very prominent, though, and it's going to give a new framework as opposed to the sociological. It's going to look at the individual, right? Psychology itself is often very individualistic, or at least to a degree, and then it can become collectivistic. So if you're using, for example, Jungian psychology, you could use a Jungian approach to religion or mythology to understand things, which is going to be more collectivistic, generalistic across traditions, though rooted within the collective unconscious, the psyche, all this different stuff. Or you could look at William James, another famous psychologist who went more the phenomenological approach, as we'll see with his definition of religion. So William James, much more interested in how you describe experience. How does one experience God? That's really the whole point of religion. So his definition is much more rooted in how one experiences and feels religion and God. That's William James and his phenomenological approach. Interested in religious conversion. So the psychology of religion would be interested in how or what prompts people to convert. How do you make religious decisions? That would also fit within the psychological dimension, or the psychological approach of religion. I'm sorry. Also, something that's emerged more recently is looking at like religion and happiness. That's often rooted again within the psychology of religion. And somebody also like a Dr. Andrew Nuremberg, some of you guys may be familiar with. Andrew Nuremberg is a neuroscientist. He's developed what he calls neurotheology. Now, I personally don't like this term because theology implies a whole other set of things. The same reason why I don't use the term related to psychedelics entheogens, because the term entheogen implies God is already within, which I think leads to the paradigm it already presupposes. That's a whole other topic. But Andrew Nuremberg developed, or what he calls, neurotheology, and that's really using sort of neuroscientific equipment, modern psychological understandings, brain science, to understand religious experience. This is what he's trying to do. And a attempt to understand religious experience by like CAT scans, MRI scans, stuff like this. Like, for example, one of the research projects he did was looking at glossolalia. Glossolalia is just speaking in tongues, right? That's another way to say it. So speaking in tongues, he looked at people who would get into states of glossolalia. And one of the things that he noticed based on his brain scans is that the language centers, which actually are present in the very front of our neofrontal cortex. So the sort of, if you're going to use the evolutionary theories that the academics often promote, they would say, well, of course, because your brain is evolving and because the use of symbols and the manipulation of language is more of a recent occurrence in the phenomenon of Homo sapiens sapiens, that the language portion of the brain is actually right at the very front. It is true that is often activated when somebody's using language. Dr. Andrew Nuremberg found that when people go into states of glossolalia, their language centers deactivate. So there's actually no activity in the centers that are commonly related to the use of language. So what does that mean? I don't know. It's interesting, but that would be rooted within also a sort of psychological or a neuroscientific approach to religion, of which he is doing. You can tell he's a very secular guy. He basically, at least in my understanding, he kind of justifies religion on a very, what appears to be a sort of utilitarian, functionalistic understanding. Well, it does these things, it provides this stuff. He also did research on meditation. He looked at like certain type of monks going into deep meditative states and did brain scans on them. He did brain scans on prayer and chanting and religious music and saw that it highly activated the brain. So very interesting things that were going on when somebody was actually praying or praying or chanting or singing hymns of a sort that something different was happening than just speaking or saying words. So that was very interesting. Now, again, what does all that mean? I don't know, but is it rooted within a scientific, secular paradigm? Yes, of course. But this is just another way in which a religion can be approached and studied. Now, the next one that I wanted to talk about is the sociology of religion. And so the sociology of religion, again, a very popular way in which to approach the study of religion, is interested in the dialectic between religion and society. Religion and society. How then does religion affect social structures? How does religion affect societal understandings of birth, life, and death? How does religion construct different kinds of societies? Looking at different religions, what can we say about the societies they've created? These are sociological understandings. How does religion unify people across races? How does religion unify people across languages? These would be all sociological questions, sociological approaches to the study of religion. So, interesting way to approach. So you're going to see theorists like Emile Durkheim, like Karl Marx is going to be rooted in a very sociological approach to religion. Of course, his famous definition of religion as the opium of the people, right? The opium of the people. But certainly his approach is going to be rooted within a sort of sociology of religion. That leads to the next one, which is a philosophical approach to religion, or the philosophy of religion. And the philosophy of religion is going to be much more it's going to be interested in a whole different set of questions. The philosophy of religion is asking things like, what is religion? How can you recognize religion when you see it? What qualities of religion are consistent among all examples, if there are any? How is epistemology related to, how is it, epistemology formed by religion or something like that? These much more abstract questions. How can religion be studied outside not being part of that religion? That would be a sort of philosophical approach that some people have levied. Often in the West, clearly most people in the world, or most nations, have agreed that you can study religion objectively as a sort of third party. Other theorists have said actually you can't, because as soon as you do that, you're taking religion out of the context it's supposed to be in. And is it really still religion? I think most people probably say yes, but it's an interesting question nonetheless, and that is going to be present within the philosophy of religion. A whole different set of questions, and a whole different way to approach the phenomenon. Also, within the philosophy of religion, you can look at the relationship of concepts and ideologies and idea constructs, how they cross cultures, how are they shared between religions, how do they differentiate through religion. So you can also take a much more abstract way to analyze culture through ideas, or religions through ideas. That's another way you could use this sort of philosophical approach. The next one is law and religion. As I mentioned earlier, this is really interesting that you can actually look in religion and then study legal systems. How does a religion actually affect the legal construction within a society? How does it alter or affect their notions of justice itself? How does it inform the ways in which justice is attained? Right? These are really interesting questions that you wouldn't initially think about. That's going to be rooted within law and religion. There's a whole approach to religion related to that. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight was religion and film. Religion and film. How is religion portrayed in film, in contemporary film? There's a whole subgenre really within religious studies of analyzing films, movies, and looking at religion, the occult, magic. I mean, Jay Dyer, right? He has his whole thing, both of his two books in Esoteric Hollywood. What's that doing? Looking at the portrayal of the occult and esoteric practices in the film industry. That is a whole subdiscipline within really the subdiscipline or the subfield of religious studies. And so, so those are some of the different ways in which religion can be approached. As we see, this is much more nuanced, much more complicated, much more interesting than some people initially think. Well, it's so easy to study religion. You just do this. Really? There's so many different ways that the pie can be sliced, if you will. So now I wanted to share and put all of this stuff into practice and highlight a whole host of important theorists and their definitions of religion related to then all these different approaches we just talked about. So let me just check on the chat, make sure the chat is doing good. Looks like it's all good. Upside down question mark says, is there a way to get in contact with DPH? I sent him an email, but haven't received a response. Yeah, brother, just can you resend it? I'm not sure what your email is. I'm usually fairly quick to respond to most emails. If you just email me again or send the same thing again, I will get back to you. Sorry for that. I apologize. Been a bit busy lately. So, Okay, so now some of the definitions of religion and some of the famous theorists related to them is that the first group that I wanted to talk about is really the essentialist definitions. People saying, well, this is what religion essentially is, right? It is this. And so some of the essentialist definitions I want to cover first. The first one being from the very famous E.B. Tylor. And E.B. Tylor, a very early scholar of religion or mythology, or sometimes you consider an anthropologist of tribal tradition, stuff like that. He said the true foundation of all religions is animism, which is described as the belief in spirits inhabiting and animating beings and souls existing in things. Primitive religion. That's from something that he wrote. The book that it comes from is called Primitive Religion. So we see it's essentially animism, that religion is animism. Now, clearly we wouldn't totally accept this definition, and this definition has some serious shortcomings. But we certainly see, I think, a lot of people online take this approach to the definition of religion. And so when we look at talking about Christianity as solely being a solar religion, right? That worships the sun and the 12 zodiacs and the 12 apostles and Christmas on the 25th and yada, 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 Easter and all these different things. Yeah, we can shake our head and say, yeah, okay, yeah, agreed. But that doesn't limit what religion is. It can be those things, and it can also be much more expansive and transcendent to that. But I think the sentiment that Tylor has is something that we see in some of the alternative community, right? That it's all animism, trying to figure out what's fundamentally being symbolized through all this stuff. So even within a sort of Jungian psychological approach, I think aspects of this definition may emerge. So that is religion as animism, basically by E.B. Tylor. Now, the next definition I have is James George Frazer, right? In his famous book, The Golden Bough, I've talked about this book before, very important in regards to the concept of sympathetic magic, understanding tribal traditions. And he wrote, by religion, then, I understand a propitiation, a conciliation of powers superior to man, which are believed to direct and control the course of nature and of human life. So for him, it's more about superior powers to man, which are believed to direct and control the course of nature and human life. So getting a little bit more beyond animism and seeing it a little bit more humanistically, I guess you could say, for Frazer, but still wanting, right? That doesn't feel accurate. That doesn't feel convincing. That doesn't feel holistic enough to really describe what religion is. So let's go on to another one. So the next one we have is Max Weber. Talked about, again, the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. It's a very famous book. Max Weber says, all religions have demanded a specific presupposition that the course of the world be somehow meaningful, at least insofar as it touches upon the interest of men. The interest of men. So it's all right, I guess. Still seems really wanting. I think Frazer's may have been better than Weber's. All religions have demanded a specific presupposition that the course of the world be somehow meaningful, at least insofar as it touches upon the interest of men. I guess maybe not. That's probably actually is better than Frazer's. And it's highlighting that, I guess all religions do presuppose somehow a larger understanding of meaning. But I still want more. The next definition we have then is from Otto Rank. Otto Rank, a very famous scholar of religion. Some of you guys may be familiar with. Do look him up. I think he's worthwhile. And Otto Rank said, all religion springs, in the last analysis, not so much from fear of natural death as of final destruction. So, arguably, for a sort of eschatological emphasis, right, on this definition, that it's really about the end things, the last things, the eschatology, that all religion springs in the last analysis not so much from fear of natural death as of final destruction. I think maybe there's an element of that, but that doesn't seem any better than any of the ones previous. Next definition within this sort of essentialist category that I've constructed is Mircea Eliade. And Mircea Eliade says, Homo religious always believes there is an absolute reality, the sacred, which transcends this world but manifests itself in this world, thereby sanctifying it and making it real. Now that sounds like a little bit of a better definition. So let's read that again. Mircea Eliade, and he's talking about Homo sapiens, what he's calling Homo religious, because what he's doing is identifying religion as a unique category to us as a species. And so he says, Homo religious always believes there is an absolute reality. So there is a necessary reality, a reality that isn't created, a reality that's beyond what's here. The sacred, which transcends this world, but manifests itself in this world, thereby sanctifying it and making it real. Now, with the sanctifying it, I think he would definitely fit in with Orthodox theology. So I say, actually, just generally speaking, that this definition is probably the best one we've come up to so far. In regards to transcending this world, I would say, well, he's going to have problems with the sort of radical animistic forms of religion that doesn't really transcend this world, right? It just worships this world. But good nonetheless, better definition. Now, the last definition within the essentialist category that I've constructed is Friedrich Schleiermacher. Friedrich Schleiermacher, right? The famous Christian German theologian. Some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. And he says to take everything individual as a part of the whole, everything limited as a representation of the infinite, that is religion. The consciousness of our absolute dependence, of which is the same thing of your relation to God. So let's read that one more time. And again, this definition is rooted within a Christian context. Schleiermacher was a Protestant theologian. And so he says, Schleiermacher, to take everything individual as a part of the whole, everything limited as a representation of the infinite, that is religion. The consciousness of our absolute dependence, of which is the same thing of your relation to God. So his definition, I would say, takes a bit of the sort of argument from contingency, right? He's talking about the absolute dependence of our own existence related to God, and that is what religion is. It's the sort of atomistic individual as a part of the whole, looking at everything as a limited representation of the infinite. Religion then is the sort of categorization and the consolidating of the transcendent, of the infinite, I guess would be another way to talk about it. Not a bad definition. I would argue, maybe you guys would disagree, that the two best definitions out of the essentialist category are Mircea Eliade and Friedrich Schleiermacher. Now we move on, we get into a whole another category, of which I just have two definitions to really represent it, and that is the sociological definition of religion. And so we're going to see somebody like the Emile Durkheims, the Peter Bergers of the world. And so it's those two individuals actually that I chose to use for the sociological definition of religion. The first one is from Emile Durkheim. And so how did Emile Durkheim describe the definition of religion? What is the definition of religion from Emile Durkheim, the father of sociology? Remember, this is 19th century. This is later, second half 19th century. How did he define religion? And so Emile Durkheim says, a religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say,
things set apart and forbidden. Okay. And now we could probably agree with that. And where he's coming from is from his sociological distinction between the sacred and the profane. So he has an immense dichotomy between that which is sacred and that is which is profane. And this is now constructed the first half of his definition. A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church. All those who adhere to them, then that is his famous definition. And then there's a sub-definition that I actually found from the Elementary Forms of Religious Life, that big book that I used when I did the video on Emile Durkheim, that religion is the self-validation of a society by means of myth and ritual. So the main definition, if you were to look up Emile Durkheim's definition of religion, because it's actually fairly popular and famous, you'd get the first half, the whole thing of setting things apart from each other, the sacred and profane differentiation, and then uniting into a single moral community called a church. So we talked about in his video for Emile Durkheim his concept of the totem, of totemism, and the sort of totemic principle of finding an image, an animal, a myth, a structure, a thing, to then represent the collective. So he was looking at that at totem poles, and that's where he get his whole theory of totemism. And so we can see he's interested in how a community is unified, and he's interested in how a community separates sacred from profane. That really then encapsulates much of his definition. But the quick definition that I grabbed from the Elementary Forms of Religious Life, I think is actually not bad for the few words it uses. Religion is the self-validation of a society by means of myth and ritual. It's very secular, right? He's an atheistic Jew, but that's Emile Durkheim. So we get a very functionalistic approach, a sociological definition, right? A sociological definition that it's all about the separation of the sacred and the profane and the unification of the community. Now, as Peter Berger, American sociologist, has a very, not very different, still sociological, obviously, but a different approach than Durkheim. And so Peter Berger, he's making his definition. This is second half 20th century. So I would say this definition probably comes somewhere between the 70s and the 80s. And Peter Berger, it may even be the 60s, somewhere between the 60s and the 80s, I guess, be a safe bet. And Peter Berger wrote that religion is the human enterprise by which the sacred cosmos is established. Religion is the human enterprise by which the sacred cosmos is established. Put differently, religion is the audacious attempt to conceive the entire universe as being humanly significant. Religion is the human attitude towards a sacred order that includes within it all being, human or otherwise, i.e., belief in a cosmos, the meaning of which both includes and transcends man. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that one. Peter Berger, let's run through it one more time. His definition of religion is the human enterprise by which the sacred cosmos is established. Could we agree with that? That, okay, what cultures do in their construction of what we would call religion is that they're establishing a sacred cosmos. Okay, I think most of us wouldn't limit religion to that, but certainly that's an aspect what religion is doing in a sort of functionalistic way. Okay, let's move on. Then he says, put differently, religion is the audacious attempt to conceive the entire universe as being humanly significant. What stands out to me when I read that sentence? Well, when he says audacious attempt, he's saying, and then using the entire universe, he's clearly using a sort of modern understanding of like modern cosmology, right? It's so audacious. Now, mind you, Peter Berger was a Protestant, but who knows what that means in regards to his theology. But is it so audacious? I mean, it can be. It depends on where you're coming from. And so I think it's kind of hinting where he's coming from when he says, put differently, religion is the audacious attempt to conceive the entire universe as being humanly significant. Religion is the human attitude towards a sacred order that includes within it all being. Well, if it's related to God, but it depends on how they would define God. So yeah, to all being, okay. Belief in a cosmos, the meaning of which both includes and transcends man. So interesting definition there. It's certainly a lot better than Emile Durkheim's definition. So maybe we'd have a few problems with Peter Berger's sociological definition of religion, but it's certainly a little bit better. Again, you guys can feel free to post who you think gets the best definition of religion. I'd definitely be curious. The next category of definitions is the phenomenological definition of religion. And so in here, I actually have 4 theorists talking about a sort of phenomenological definition of religion. And so when I talk about phenomenology, if you don't know, phenomenology is really just a sort of fancy word. It's a philosophical term for the study of phenomenon, right? Really, it's the study of experience itself. It's the study of experience. And so William James, as we will see, provides what religious studies or what any religious studies professor would say. If you ask, well, what is a phenomenological definition of religion? They say, well, you would be interested in William James's definition. William James's definition often represents this category. And so William James, again, the American psychologist, one of the prominent members of the pragmatist school, he was interested in religious experience. He had some experiences with nitrous oxide. So from my understanding, he inhaled some nitrous oxide, went into an altered state, and in that altered state had what he perceived to be a very numinous spiritual experience. And he was a man plagued by a lot of depression in his life, even though he came from a very wealthy and prominent family. His brother was the famous novelist Henry James. But this experience with the nitrous oxide sort of woke him up. And this is what sort of prompted his famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And this is where he came up with this definition. So through his own phenomenology, through his own sort of mystical, spiritual encounter, through altered states of consciousness. And William James says this: religion is the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. So nothing there related to society, nothing there related to text, nothing there related to animism, nothing there related to ritual. For William James, religion is purely the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. So religion then is totally divorced from community, from tradition, from structure. It's purely your own experience of awe. It's your own, I think, what in the modern contemporary context we would call your spirituality. It's all about your spiritual experience. I think if you were going to reiterate William James's definition in contemporary colloquial phrases, we would say, for William James, religion is just ecstatic spiritual experience that occurs in all different shapes and sizes within all different traditions. And therefore, that's ultimately what religion is, because it's that feeling or experience that ultimately what somebody appeals to. This is certainly new in all the variety of our definitions, but I'd say lacks quite a bit. It's often very appealing to people within like the psychedelic world because it validates what they already want to believe, that, oh, well, what we're doing and going into these altered states, this is religion. This is what religion was always supposed to be. This is what religion is. It's you guys that are clueless, right? So this definition kind of hints at that worldview, if you will. The next definition in the phenomenological definitions of religion is from Rudolph Otto. Rudolph Otto, again, I mentioned him earlier in the stream regarding his concept of the numinous. The numinous, which he coined to describe the overpowering sense of mystery that he believed to be part of all religion. So this overpowering sense of mystery, what he called the numinous, that was coined by Rudolph Otto, the famous scholar. And this is what he says. He says, Rudolph Otto, his definition of religion is that which grows out of and gives expression to experience of the holy in its various aspects. So religion is that which grows out of and gives expression to experience of the holy in its various aspects. It's just a little, I don't know. Yes, religion does grow out of and give expression to the experience of the holy in its various aspects, but religion, again, no mention of text, no aspect of tradition, no sort of communal dimension to it. So certainly, I would say, again, limited. And I think this is what we're going to see a lot with the phenomenological, because we're rooting it, as soon as you take the phenomenological definition, you're rooting the definition of religion within the individual. And you can't really do that, because then that nullifies the validity of whatever religion, which again would make sense given the paradigm that this stuff is coming from. But as soon as you root the definition of religion within the individual and the individual's experience, religion becomes subjective, which is kind of their point. But you can't objectively study the subjective. I guess you can to a degree, but I don't know. It just seems like there's some contradictions here in categories, right? If the definition of religion is rooted within a phenomenological approach, when we talked about the 7 dimensions of religion, well, what is all that then describing? Because that's not all described, because the experiential was just one dimension of 7 dimensions. So we don't see these really hitting on all those various dimensions of religion that we began this video with. The next definition comes from Paul Tillich. I'm sure some of you guys know who he is. And Paul Tillich says that religion is, and he's actually a famous Christian scholar. Paul Tillich said, religion is the state of being grasped by an ultimate concern, a concern which qualifies all other concerns as preliminary, and a concern that in itself provides the answer to the question of the meaning of our existence. So what are we seeing here with Paul Tillich's phenomenological definition of religion is that religion is really concerned with ultimate authority. What are you ultimately concerned with? What's your ultimate priority of meaning, of events, of your worldview, your cosmology? And so he would say that is what religion is. It's what the state of being grasped by ultimate concern. What are you ultimately concerned with? Everlasting life. You can kind of see maybe his Christian elements related in this definition. And other concerns as preliminary, as a concern that it in itself provides the answer to the question of the meaning of our existence. Now, Paul Tillich was also very ecumenical, so we can see how he's providing a definition that seems like kind of rooted within a Christian worldview, but one that could fit for all people in all parts of the world. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that definition, really. But let me know. Paul Tillich says, religion is the state of being grasped by an ultimate concern, a concern which qualifies all other concerns as preliminary, and a concern that in itself provides the answer to the question of the meaning of our existence. I don't know. Next phenomenological definition is Alfred North Whitehead, the process theorist, right? Those of you who know philosophy, know process philosophy, right? Of course you know who Alfred North Whitehead is. Who doesn't? Joking. I'm sure many of you guys don't. He is a very interesting and important guy, though, to know if you're interested in the history of intellectual thought. Alfred North Whitehead is a very interesting guy, a bit of a Platonist, if you will, but developed what is often called process philosophy, or he's the founder of process theory. So Alfred North Whitehead has a very short definition of religion. His is just religion is what an individual does with his solitariness. Well, that seems wanting. Religion is what an individual does with his solitariness. I don't think so. That doesn't really satisfy my appetite for a definition of religion. I would say that might be one of the more limiting ones that we've read. So, not a big fan of Alfred North Whitehead. I like some of his philosophy. I like some of his ideas. Not a big fan of his definition of religion. So that kind of concludes the phenomenological definitions. Here are some of the psychological definitions. Then I have a couple functionalist definitions. Then I have a couple perennialist definition and a pragmatic definition. And so the psychological definitions, I have two psychological definitions of religion. So these definitions are going to be totally rooted within psychology. The first one I couldn't pass up. Of course, I have to have Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud, his definition of religion is that religion would thus be the universal obsessional neurosis of humanity. Oh, wow. Thank you for that. I might as well just use Karl Marx's definition that religion is the opium of the people. It's so descriptive. Religion would thus be the universal obsessional neurosis of humanity, like the obsessional neurosis of children. It arose out of the Oedipus complex, our relation to the Father. So it comes from our relationship to the Father. Boy, good old Sigmund. Yeah, Ephraim says good old Sig. Yeah, basically. Real positive definition of religion there, that religion is the universal obsessional neurosis of humanity, like the obsessional neurosis of children that rose out of the Oedipus complex and our relationship to the Father. You know, I think maybe it's all his sexual desires for his family members that really sort of took a nasty turn in his own psychology. You know, I'm halfway kidding. Of course, he did have some weird sexual desires. His whole Freudian psychology is built upon the sort of dynamics of sexuality and sexual energies. Even, again, the Oedipus complex, relationships between child and mother. So I think that is certainly probably the worst definition of religion and that we've encountered. By far worse than Alfred North Whitehead's. But actually one that's been influential, and that's why I put it on here. Sigmund Freud has been influential in the study of religion, despite really not seeing much that you could glean from his work in regards to religion, but it has been. And so looking at, for example, phallic or vulvic symbolism within religion, it's not uncommon then for scholars to take what we would consider to be a Freudian approach and talk about a culture's relationship to Shiva's lingam, right? Some of you guys probably got that reference. Lingam is just a term referring to sort of phallic shape that you would often see. If you put in like Shiva's lingam, you'd see what I'm talking about. I digress. Anyways, the next psychological definition comes from Friedrich Engels. Oh, Friedrich Engels. I love communism. No, I don't. I'm kidding. So we've already talked about Marx and his definition. So Friedrich Engels, his definition of religion is that all religion is nothing but the fantastic reflection in men's of those external forces which control their daily life. A reflection in which the terrestrial forces assume the form of supernatural forces. So for Engels, again, that's why I left him on here, tied to Karl Marx, right? The Communist Manifesto. religion is really just man's fantastic imagination personifying natural forces. Duh. Don't you know that? Again, if we were going to be a little bit more critical, especially at a paradigm level, he's not going to have much of a metaphysics, again, to root his own epistemology, his own morality, his own, the whole thing. Why would fighting for the worker be good if he isn't building off the remnants of a Christian morality in the first place? All this different stuff, right? So not a real strong definition there by Friedrich Engels, though we really wouldn't expect much from Sigmund Freud or Friedrich Engels. But Friedrich Engels, one more time, says that all religion is nothing but the fantastic reflection in men's minds of those external forces which control their daily life, a reflection in which the terrestrial forces assume the form of supernatural forces. Okay. So that concludes the psychological definitions. Now I have a couple functionalist definitions, and these are also very prominent in much of the contemporary period within academia. I would say within, obviously, Sigmund Freud and Friedrich Engels, you're not going to find many contemporary scholars in religious studies make those arguments for a definition of religion. But what you will see still are sociological definitions, psychological definitions, and functionalist definitions. I would say the functionalist definition is probably the most common. And so one example of a functionalist definition we could get from, again, the famous scholar Clifford Geertz. And he was very much into anthropology, and he studied, his definition is religion is, so for Clifford Geertz, very interested in semiotics, and this is one of the things that I can appreciate. I don't mind some of the work from Geertz. Clifford Geertz says religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. This is from his book, Religion as a Cultural System. So, interesting definition there, right? So it's a functionalistic definition. Religion plays a function in the world. This is why it is so long-lasting, even though he uses that word, just as a phenomenon, right? Why all these cultures are creating religion, religious theologies, traditions. That religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations. Long-lasting moods and motivations. So that's interesting. We talked about the process of legitimation with Peter Berger. Back to the sociology, he was back in our sociological definitions of religion, and Peter Berger had the concept that I've talked about before called the legitimation, or the process of legitimation. And the process of legitimation is how you construct the cultural canopy that unites a culture, and you unite a culture through the process, through creating the sacred canopy, and you do that by externalization of ideas that then become objectified, and because they become objectified, they can be internalized by other people, and as soon as they're internalized by other people, they can then externalize them. So then there's this feedback loop of getting ideas, thoughts, behavior patterns, modes externalized, objectified, and internalized. You create this feedback loop, and then you can create the sacred canopy. And so that is a lot focused on semiotics. So we can see that definition already playing here in the eyes of Geertz, where he says religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions in such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Interesting. So, very, very interesting stuff there with Clifford Geertz. Again, I think his definition's still wanting, of course, right? Still wanting, but has some interesting stuff there. Now, the next definition is from Robert Bellah. Robert Bellah is also an American scholar, studied religion. I don't expect most of you guys to know who he is. You'd have to really be a real scholastic or intellectual academic in religion to know him. But Robert Bellah, his definition is that religion is a set of symbolic forms and acts which relate man to the ultimate condition of his existence. And so we can see in both these functionalistic definitions that religion is really just occupying a sort of process of semiotics, that religion provides a sort of semiotic foundation for culture to understand meaning, to communicate to each other. And so religion, for Robert Bellah, is a set of symbolic forms and acts which relate man to the ultimate condition of his existence. As a one-sentence definition, I say that it actually is not bad, right? So it's religion as a set of symbolic forms. Well, ritual, symbolic. You could look at art as symbolic. I mean, if we look back at the 7 dimensions, we have the ritual, the experiential, the narrative, the doctrinal, the ethical, social, and material. Not all of those are present within his definition, but it's not bad for one sentence that religion is a set of symbolic forms and acts which relate man. Acts, so now we have ritual, we have things that you're actually doing which incorporate subjective, experience to relate man to the ultimate condition of his existence. So still wanting, not the greatest, but interesting nonetheless. And then the perennialist definition, the next definition that I have, I use George Bernard Shaw, and what he says is there is only one religion, though there are hundreds versions of it. And so this, I think, is really the sort of presupposition of many people in the New Age, people with I self-identify as spiritual but not religious, that there is only one religion. And there are thousands or hundreds of versions of it trying to describe the one God, right? There's oneness. God is oneness. So we see the same motifs in the perennialistic worldview, the focus on oneness, the focus that all traditions are leading you to the same place, this or that. That is the perennialist definition. Again, this is something that most people have probably encountered in the contemporary period with a lot of the New Agers, is the perennialist definition. There's only one religion, George Bernard Shaw says, though there are hundreds of versions of it. Now, the pragmatic definition, this is the last definition I have. This is the end of the video. The pragmatic definition comes to us by John Dewey. Some of you probably don't know who John Dewey is. John Dewey is a very important American scholar in the school of pragmatism. So he's known as a sort of pragmatist. I actually had my undergraduate advisor who was an ethics scholar in religion. He'd written a book on John Ruskin. I don't know if you guys are familiar who he is. A book on John Ruskin, and he was also said that he was a pragmatist in the school of John Dewey. And so John Dewey's an important individual, although we would never agree with his relativistic, pragmatic form of epistemology. But John Dewey says the religious is an activity pursued on behalf of an ideal against obstacles and in spite of threats of personal loss because of its general and enduring value. So his pragmatic definition is that religion is really just an activity pursued because of its enduring value. That's really it. That the religious, again, according to John Dewey, the famous pragmatist, the philosophical school of pragmatism, says the religious is an activity pursued on behalf of an ideal end against obstacles and in spite of threats of personal loss because of its enduring value. Enduring value. Well, that concludes our definitions of religion right there. Let me check the chat. Looks like everything. Oh, Frankfurt School. Yep, people know what the Frankfurt School is. Tom Green. Yeah, no, I'm not on Streamlab. You can super chat straight to YouTube if you'd like. So super chats work. Tom Green, if you're interested. Again, if you guys have any questions, that pretty much wraps up today's video. What did we just encounter? Well, we just went over, well, what is religious studies, the history and the development of the field of religious studies, the limitations of the field of religious studies. The field of religious studies comes with its own secular limitations, its post-Enlightenment presuppositions, concepts of progress, concepts of perennialism. All these things are present within the religious studies landscape and so are problematic. However, it is interesting that religious studies offers us tools to study world religions, tools to look at commonalities and differences. Not that we as Christians or Orthodox Christians necessarily agree with everything or trying to equalize, our own theology with maybe other traditions, but these are useful ways. These are mature academic approaches to go about things. So we looked at the 7 dimensions of religion established by Ninian Smart. We looked at various approaches to studying religion, the psychology of religion, the sociology of religion, the philosophy of religion, the anthropology of religion, the economics of religion, looking at economical frameworks and commodification of religion, interesting ways to approach that most people don't. And then, of course, we looked at a series of definitions of religion, which has always been a contentious topic within the field of religious studies. What is religion? How do you define religion? And the fact that it is so difficult to do so, and really there hasn't been a single definition that the field has agreed upon, shows that this is a continuing struggle. How do you define religion? I'd be very curious if you guys have ideas to leave your definition of religion in the comment section. Be curious to hear what exactly that is. But yeah, so that concludes today's video. Oh, Ephraim threw in $5. Thank you very much, brother. I truly appreciate it. He says, recently became a Codal member. I appreciate your insight as always, DPH. Please pray for me as I become a catechumen last Sunday. Well, congratulations, brother. Congratulations, Ephraim, on becoming a catechumen in the Orthodox Church. That is great, brother. God bless you and your family. I will certainly keep you in my prayers tonight. And always, anybody out there, always keep you guys. I'm always thankful for the audience. I'm thankful for you guys. I'm thankful for so much you guys teach me. I get things wrong. You message me privately, but thank you, brother, for becoming a member. Thank you. Again, if you guys haven't and you're interested in exclusive content, go to the website, davidpatrickcarey.com, and become a website member. You will get access to exclusive content, and in that content, I have videos with existential delight, testimony by Subdeacon Mark, personal stories. I have 2 videos of which that I'll be uploading here recently. The second half to today's video, I have a whole list of terminology and terms that I'm going to be putting up in regards to the academic study of religion. And then I also have a story about a friend getting jumped by 8 Chinese guys in Guangzhou, China, by men that had family members back to the Communist Party and were from Beijing and were doing trade down in southern China, and we got into a brawl. One of my friends gets jumped. It involves me and my roommate down in our underwear fighting these guys off. If you want to hear that story, you're going to have to become a member over at the website, and you'll get that over in our exclusive library. But thank you so much, Ephraim. Thank you for the $5. Thank you for becoming a member. Again, I greatly appreciate that, guys. Please, becoming a member is one of the best ways you guys can help me and aid me, and just if you contribute to what I'm trying to build. the $5 a month membership is the way. Like that's what I'm trying to build. So thank you guys so much. If you only give me $5, just give me $5 a month through a website membership. Plus you get all the videos, and it only grows. The value of the $5 only goes up. So thank you, brother. Daniel E throws in a $9.99, no comment. Daniel E, thank you, brother. $9.99. I really appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so humbled and appreciative that you would even find what I'm doing worth contributing to. So thank you very, very, very much, brother. I really do appreciate it. Tom Green throws in 5. I'm not exactly sure what that is. Have you heard of your mate Tom? He is an Aussie guy who's into psychs, but he recently interviewed Jay to learn about orthodoxy. Would you also? Oh, okay. There was an email I received in regards to your mate Tom. So Tom Green, I'm not sure if you messaged me or not, but there was an email. I do now remember there's one email I have not got back to, and it was about a guy talking about your mate Tom. I wasn't familiar with him. I was in a hurry that day. The fact that you just put your super chat totally just sparked a memory that there's an email that I had not responded back to. I'm usually pretty good about responding back to emails, guys. So if you want to talk to me, you can email me at churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com. I really need to get a Proton Mail account, but I haven't yet. I will, though. I promise. But if you guys want to reach out, you usually can email me if you want to have a direct conversation, or you can DM me on some of the social medias. If you guys want to know a little bit more about like my regular day-to-day life, I would recommend you guys actually follow me over on Instagram. And so like today's workout, I'll be posting some clips from today's workout that I did before. So I got up this morning, try to prepare for today's video a little bit. Then I had a recording session with my gym partner who I go with to record my fitness videos. So we had a workout session, then I hurried back, ate, did some more preparation, and then streamed, got my stream going. Unfortunately, my dog had a couple of seizures. So not last night, not the night before, but 2 nights ago, Saturday night and Friday night. Friday night and Saturday night, he had a seizure. So now I got to run and grab, I got to edit my fitness videos, throw those up on my Instagram stories, and then go grab the CBD. So that's what I'll be doing the rest of the evening. But yeah, I don't know how I got to that. Again, you can see I ramble and I go on tangents. But Tom Green, thank you for the super chat, brother. And yeah, I'm definitely interested. If there's an Aussie guy who's interested in orthodoxy, big into psychedelics, I'm definitely interested. I'm definitely interested in having a chat. It'd be great to have him on the channel. If you could DM me privately, Tom Green, or point me in the right direction to your mate Tom, send me something, then I'd be more than willing to reach out. Maybe you can come on the show and we can talk about psychedelics, and I can talk about contradictions, and we can get into him becoming orthodox, or at least becoming more ortho-curious, if you will. So I am definitely interested. So thanks for that super chat, and thanks for sharing. Again, guys, smash that like button if you haven't. If you had just joined late, please hit that like. Always greatly appreciated. Basically a 2-hour stream today. We were really rocking and rolling. Got an old jacket. I really don't wear this jacket very much, and decided to get it out. I love this color. What do you guys know about the elbow patches, right? Elbow patches. Come on now. Bring them back. Bring back the elbow patches. I love them. So, Tom Green says, I DM'd you and him also. He replied to me. Okay, cool. Awesome, brother. I will take a look again right after this. I got to edit some videos, and then I will get back to you, and I got to head out and go get some CBD for my dog. But anyways, that really is all I have today. It doesn't look like anybody has any more questions. Simon the Amputee says David beat up 8 Chinese dudes naked. Well, it's certainly it's a very, very interesting story. So if your interest is piqued, I recommend becoming a website member. You will hear the whole story from the horse's mouth. And I was in my underwear. It was a physical brawl. Wild evening. Let's just say we didn't go to bed that night. Mama Llama said prayers for Sergeant. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Mama Llama. I greatly appreciate that. But yeah, that basically wraps up today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea in regards to getting more into the sort of academic, scholastic ways in which we study things, but I thought it was an important topic. I thought it was worthwhile, and I hope to really be informative. Now, again, this video continues over at the website, where I will be recording probably tomorrow morning the second half of today's video, and that will be up on the website for members only. So if you want to hear me talk about terminology, important concepts and words related to religious studies and the academic study of religion, you may want to check out the video that will be up for members only tomorrow. So anyways, guys, thank you again. Thank you to everybody who threw in a super chat. Thank you very much to everybody who's gone to the website and signed up and become members. I promise things are only going to get better. I promise things will only continue to grow. And again, I just feel indebted. I just feel excited. And I'm ready for 2021, guys. With all the chaos, at least I know I'm moving in a direction that I want to move in, right? And I think that's useful for all of us, is just to be confident and be determined and be consistent in the direction in which you want to move. And even though the world is falling apart, even though the globalists are trying to win, we can also win in our own ways, our relationships with God, our relationships with other people, in the development of ourselves. So keep working on yourself and keep praying. So anyways, thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Simon Amputees. Great stream. Take care. Take care, Mama Llama. Thank you for the prayers. Thank you again to everybody who threw in the super chats. Please smash that like button. And as always, until next time, God bless.